Welcome to another impactful story that highlights the importance of courage, resilience, and standing up against injustice. Today, we delve into a gripping tale of an ordinary woman's extraordinary fight for justice after a shocking encounter with those sworn to protect. Stay tuned to see how truth prevails and accountability is upheld in the face of adversity. The sun had just begun its descent, casting a warm amber glow over the small downtown area. Cars hummed quietly along the street, their drivers eager to get home or enjoy an evening out. A cozy corner cafe, its windows adorned with hanging plants and fairy lights, stood as the centerpiece of the block. Inside, patrons chatted over coffee and pastries, the air rich with the aroma of roasted beans and cinnamon. Outside, Janine Parker sat in her car, a modest silver sedan parked neatly in front of the cafe. The 32-year-old woman had just come from a long day at work and decided to treat herself to her favorite mocha latte before heading home. She adjusted her scarf and checked her phone, scrolling through messages as she debated whether to sit inside or take her drink to go. The peaceful scene was suddenly interrupted by the low rumble of a police cruiser pulling up behind her. Two officers stepped out, their expressions stern. One of them, a tall man with a square jaw and mirrored sunglasses, approached her window, tapping on it with a gloved hand. Janine rolled down the window, her brow furrowing in confusion. "Good evening, officer. Is something wrong?" The officer, whose badge read Sergeant Miller, crossed his arms. "You're parked in a no-parking zone, ma'am. I'm going to need to see your license and registration." Janine blinked, glancing at the clearly marked sign that read 15-minute parking. "Customers only?" She gestured toward it. "I'm sorry, officer, but this is a parking spot for cafe customers. I'm about to go inside." Miller's lips tightened into a thin line. "Don't argue with me, ma'am. Step out of the vehicle." "But Janine began, her voice calm yet firm. She glanced around, noting a few people inside the cafe watching the interaction with growing interest. "Officer, I don't understand. What's the problem?" "Step out of the car," Miller repeated, his tone now sharp and commanding. Reluctantly, Janine complied. She opened the door and stepped onto the pavement, her heels clicking softly against the concrete. Standing before the officer, her hands visible at her sides, Janine kept her voice steady. "What is this about, officer? I've done nothing wrong." Miller didn't respond. Instead, he suddenly and inexplicably lashed out, kicking her in the shin with enough force to make her stumble. A gasp escaped her lips as pain shot up her leg. Shocked, she looked up at him, her eyes wide. "Shut up," he barked, pointing a finger in her face. "I'm in charge here. You'll do as I say and you'll keep your mouth shut." Inside the cafe, the once buzzing chatter had fallen silent. Patrons stared in disbelief, their faces etched with outrage. A murmur of discontent rippled through the crowd, and someone began booing. The sound grew, joined by others until the cafe echoed with voices of protest. Miller's jaw tightened as he turned to glare at the onlookers. His face reddened, and he seemed to bristle under the weight of their judgment. Turning back to Janine, he pulled out his notepad and began furiously scribbling. Resisting arrest, obstruction of justice, parking violation, he muttered, adding more charges to the list with each word. His hand moved so quickly it was as if he were trying to drown out the cafe's booze with his pen. Janine stood silently, her fists clenched at her sides. She felt the eyes of the cafe patrons on her, their support a silent comfort amidst the humiliation and pain. She straightened her back, refusing to let the officer's abuse rob her of her dignity. Finally, Miller ripped the ticket from his notepad and shoved it toward her. Without another word, he stormed back to his cruiser, slamming the door shut. The tires screeched as he sped off, leaving a cloud of dust in his wake. Janine exhaled shakily, her hands trembling as she looked down at the crumpled ticket in her hand. Behind her, the door of the cafe swung open, and several patrons hurried out. "Are you okay?" a young woman asked, her voice full of concern. "That was outrageous," an older man added, shaking his head. "You didn't deserve that." Janine managed a small, grateful smile. "Thank you. I'll be fine." Another patron, a man in a business suit, held up his phone. "I got the whole thing on video," he said. "You should file a complaint. We'll back you up." Janine nodded, her resolve hardening. She wouldn't let this incident define her or go unanswered. With the support of witnesses and the video evidence, she knew she had the means to hold Sergeant Miller accountable. Justice might be slow, but she was determined to see it served. The courtroom buzzed with anticipation as Janine's case against Sergeant Miller began. Rows of spectators filled the benches, including several patrons from the cafe who had come to testify on her behalf. The judge, a silver-haired woman with a no-nonsense demeanor, entered the room and called the court to order. Janine sat at the plaintiff's table with her attorney, a poised and articulate woman named Carla Dawson. Across from them sat Sergeant Miller, his once stern face now etched with tension. His lawyer whispered to him, but Miller's eyes remained fixed on the table. One by one, witnesses took the stand, recounting the events of that day. The video recording played on a large screen, showing Miller's unnecessary aggression and Janine's calm compliance. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the courtroom as the footage unfolded. When it was Miller's turn to speak, he rose slowly and approached the stand. Clearing his throat, he looked out at the room, his expression a mix of shame and resignation. "I want to start by apologizing to Ms. Parker," he began, his voice subdued. "I had a rough day, and the pressures of this job got the better of me. That doesn't excuse my actions, and I take full responsibility for what I did." The judge listened intently, her gaze unwavering. "Officer Miller, your conduct was not only unprofessional but also an abuse of your authority. Such behavior erodes public trust in law enforcement." After a brief recess, the judge delivered her verdict. Miller was ordered to pay damages to Janine for pain and suffering, suspended from duty for 3 months without pay, and required to attend mandatory counseling sessions. The ruling brought a sense of closure to Janine and the many who had supported her. Outside the courthouse, reporters and supporters gathered around Janine. She spoke briefly, her voice steady and resolute. "This case wasn't just about me. It was about accountability and the importance of standing up against injustice. I'm grateful for everyone who came forward and for the system that upheld the truth today." As she walked away, a wave of relief washed over her. Justice had been served, and she could finally begin to move forward. If you found this story inspiring, don't forget to like, comment, and share your thoughts below. Subscribe to our channel and hit the bell icon for more stories that shine a light on courage, resilience, and the pursuit of justice.